Much is being talked about on policies that are changing almost on a daily basis in the United States of America since President Trump took over. What does that mean for the United States of America? What does it mean for India? What does it mean for the world? To discuss this and more, I'm being joined by James Carafano, who is a distinguished senior fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us. James, let's begin with the fact that there's a very important call between Putin and President Trump. What are the expectations in terms of what can President Trump, what can the U.S. do in bringing about peace?
Yeah. So I'm on the spot because I could be wrong in just a couple hours. But I think Trump holds all the cards. I think he has enormous leverage on the Ukrainians, which was obviously just seen. I also think he has enormous leverage on the Russians. Many people say, well, he said all these nice things. But what they haven't talked about is the U.S. actually, very quietly, has been putting enormous additional pressure on the Russians on the banking sector and the oil sector. So he is actually putting a ton of pressure on the Russians, and he's signaling there's a lot more to come. So he has enormous pressure, pressure on both sides. And what he wants is actually very achievable. He wants a small deal. He wants the fighting to stop. He's like, look, let's be honest. We are not going to bankroll Ukraine reconquering all of its territory. It's not even possible. They don't even have the population or the armed forces to do that. The Russians are never going to conquer Ukraine. It's just not going to happen. So my guess is he's not going to hand anything to Putin that Putin didn't get on the battlefield. So I don't think Putin's going to get any gimmies here. But on the other hand, I think he's going to be pretty clear that playtime is over. Ukraine is a free and independent nation, and that's going to be respected. And I would put money that that's where we're going to end.
What does this mean for Zelensky? Is this end game Zelensky? Because I don't think Putin wants to or will be willing to negotiate with Zelensky. And should there be a change in regime, there will be a massive compromise that Ukraine will have to accept when it comes to giving up land. But in return, critical minerals that the U.S. wants.
Well, first of all, you're not giving up land if the enemy's sitting on the land, right? They took it, right? So I don't think that's a compromise that Ukraine's really being asked to make. Whether what Zelensky's political future will largely be up to Ukrainians. I mean, we've seen any scenario you can imagine. We saw Winston Churchill win World War II and then immediately get voted out of office. We've seen wartime leaders who essentially became heroes and stayed in power. So I don't know what it holds, but I think Ukraine is going to get the deal that I think most Ukrainians expect. The fighting stops. We get to rebuild our country. And I think that's what most Ukrainians want. And to be honest, I think that's what most Europeans want. So the irony of a lot of this, all this immense criticism on Donald Trump, is what he's actually putting on the table is really what most Europeans and most Ukrainians recognize as the most reasonable, practical thing, which is we've got to stop the fighting. It's the most important thing.
What is also most interesting over here at Raisina is that I'm speaking to a lot of European ministers, foreign ministers, defense ministers, and they all, despite all the criticism that we heard of Trump asking NATO countries to contribute more, most of the European ministers over here agreed. They said, yes, it is indeed correct that Europe was paying lesser and that they should be increasing the budget. So over here, it does seem like his point is validated. He stands validated by none other than the European ministers. But will that allow U.S. then to stay on in NATO, or is there a rethink on NATO itself?
No, I think, look, if Donald Trump didn't care about Europe, he wouldn't be trying to get the Ukraine war to end. Which is not having wars in Europe is important for the stability of Europe. If, sorry, can we start over?
Yeah.
Sorry. If Donald Trump didn't care about Europe, he wouldn't be trying to get the Ukraine war to end because wars are destabilizing to Europe. So it's important. If Donald Trump did not care about Europe, he would not care about Greenland. Greenland is of no value to the United States. It's only important because it's an important, critical part of the strategic bridge across the transatlantic. If Donald Trump didn't care about Europe, he wouldn't care about the Panama Canal. The only reason why the Panama Canal is really important from a strategic standpoint for the United States is that's what allows us to move our Navy from one ocean to the other. 70% of the U.S. Navy is in the Pacific. If we want to react to something in Europe or the Middle East, we have to move it, and the cruising time through the Panama Canal is critical. So
You don't want Chinese control there.
absolutely. So of course Trump cares about you, but he's put his presidential prestige on the line to end the war in Ukraine. He's made the demand, which actually all Europeans agree, Europe needs to spend more in the defense of Europe. So I actually think the transatlantic community is in great shape, but I think this is the great disconnect between this kind of public angst about everything Trump ever says and what people who actually run countries acknowledge, which is Trump is actually right.
Will Putin listen to Trump?
It doesn't matter. Putin doesn't have a lot of cards to play. He is not going to conquer Ukraine. They're not going to get that much more territory. They're plowing through stuff. They can't do anything on their economy. They have to divert everything to this war effort. They're incredibly vulnerable. They're increasingly weakened in their relationship with China. Putin needs a strategic pause as much as Ukraine does. And this is why I think why peace could be at hand. Both sides can argue that this is good for them. And they both can argue, I'll go back. Putin can say, oh, the Europeans will forget Ukraine. I'll go back and get it later. And the Europeans say, well, Europe and the U.S. will help us rebuild and we'll be invulnerable to Ukraine in the future. That's everybody. That's what peace deal. That's how peace deals happen.
Okay, let's then shift focus to the other front, the Israel-Hamas war. A very important policy decision, and this is an announcement, a stand, a position that Trump had taken even before taking office, that he is going to support Israel. But what about the loss of civilian lives? How does one look at Gaza? How does one look at the future of Palestine or Palestinians, James?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy. What we've learned is Hamas doesn't care about Palestinian lives. Iran doesn't care about Palestinian lives. And the people that are supposed to be responsible for these populations are using them as pawns. And so if we actually care about the future of Gaza, the future of the people in Gaza, the first thing we have to do is get the people who have put their lives at risk for no good purpose whatsoever out of there. And I think that's the top in the president's priority is you cannot build on a foundation of nothing. The notion that we have to stop and then we're just going to let the UN come back in and fund Hamas and we're going to let Hamas come back in and they're going to build up their war chest and do this again in 10 years, that's nuts. That's crazy. It's the same reason, same logic in Ukraine. We have to end the war because we should have never got to this point in the first place. And the one thing we're never going to do is we're never going to go back to the conditions that allow people to think I can solve this by war again. And so just like he's going to want a free and independent Ukraine, because he's not going to want another war there, he's going to want a Gaza and Western Bank that are not controlled by people who are willing to throw their people under the bus because the Iranians paid them to do it.
But will the Palestinian lives matter? Will they get their land? Will they be able to live in their land? Because we all care for where we live, our homeland, our country. Will they get a state? Will they get a land?
Well, I don't think they're going to get a state because there is a state. It's the state of Israel. And this notion about creating a state which would be a state sponsor of terrorism, a tool of the Iranians, an oppressor of its own people and thoroughly corrupt, who would do that? What essentially saying statehood for Palestinians is condemn Palestinians to the next October 7th. That's not going to happen. I don't know what the future is going to be, but it's not going to be the past. The past is the idea of a two-state solution, that you turn the state, that you create a Palestinian state that is committed to the destruction of Israel. That's not going to happen.
But not to the destruction of Israel, but for the rights of Palestinian people, will they be able to get?
Well, there's actually a lot of Palestinians that live in Israel, and they have all
Arabs,
and they have all kinds of rights, and they are treated as equal Israeli citizens. So there's no reason why people in Gaza and the West Bank can have the same rights and the same benefits as everybody that lives in Israel.
Are you saying that this will be incorporated into Israel? That this is Israeli?
Well, this is up to Israel. I mean, it is a sovereign country, and it's up to them. And what the U.S. contribution is the U.S. contribution is we can't tell you what the future of Israel is, but we can tell you that we absolutely support not creating conditions that led us to October 7th.
Okay. Coming to India and the United States of America, where do you see or perceive the relations from here on? The personal rapport between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi is quite evident and visible, but there is the trade aspect, which has been a niggling point between India and the United States of America. How do you see the two countries navigate that very complicated yet sensitive space?
Well, having only been here for the last 20 years, right, what we've seen is now 4 American presidents, Republican and Democrat, all investing in building a stronger strategic partnership with India. That's not going to change. That's absolutely going to move forward. I think the trade thing is healthy. India needs to grow, and it needs policies that are going to create growth. The tariff issue is not really about with India. It's not about the United States making money or punishing India. The tariff issue is not about the United States making money from India or punishing India. It's about creating a real economic partnership that's going to allow both countries to really grow. And I'm absolutely 1,000% positive that's where we're going to end up.
Okay. But there are some demands, key issues that come up from Washington, D.C. every now and again, and that have to do with reducing tariffs. This is going to be a very tough space politically for India. In such a scenario, is there a time frame that we're looking at? Because they're saying end of the year trade deal to be signed or by fall. Is there a time frame? Is Modi government on the clock? Has been put on the clock by President Trump on getting a deal through?
Well, there is the speed of Trump, right? And the speed of Trump is pretty fast. So I think many times the very aggressive attitude he takes is because he wants things to move. And so, yeah, I do think there'll be a lot of pressure. But I think the obsession on tariffs is way overblown. Tariffs are a tiny part of the global economy. There's all kinds of things that drive trade, that drive economic growth, that drive jobs, other than just tariffs. And so we like to fixate on this because we all want to fixate on things that get our hair on fire. But the reality is when we look on the large scale, for example, the U.S. India potential energy partnership, way more important than what happens with tariffs. So obsess about tariffs all you want. It's like, your teenager, like you got to get them home by 10 o'clock. You don't pay any attention to what happens before 10 o'clock, right? Which is maybe not smart, right? But look at the big picture. The big picture is these economies are going to link and grow.
Okay. How will India and U.S., Trump administration and Modi government align the Make in India and America First? Make in America.
Well, because the easy answer for that is because there's plenty of room for growth manufacturing in both places. The United States has a strategic imperative of bringing industrial production back and growing as an industrial power. But India has, I think, the place to supplant China as the world's industrial manufacturing partner of choice. There is more than enough business for both sides.
Is China a competition, a threat, or a country that the U.S. is willing to engage with?
Look, China's a problem. The Chinese role in the world is negative. I'm not saying that people are going to stop buying Chinese whatever, but this government has no part of the world that it's ever touched is anybody better off. So it's a problem. It is a really serious problem. And I think the one thing that it's like, in some ways, I'm glad that China problem is there because it's brought the U.S. and India to face that we face a common threat. So we have to almost thank the Chinese for this because, honestly, the U.S. and India are natural strategic global partners. And so maybe we should thank Xi because it's like we would have never dated if it wasn't for him. But I made a mistake. I think China is an enemy, and I think the U.S. is going to treat it that way.
Okay, and finally, just questions on domestic front. What do you make of Doge? Was it really needed in terms of bringing about efficiency in the government? We do know that the government was large in terms of an establishment, in terms of the money that the Treasury was paying in salaries. But beyond that, having billionaires in the cabinet, is that how New America is going to look?
Well, first of all, Elon Musk is not a member of the U.S. cabinet. Doge did something really simple, which it actually brought transparency to government. All they did is bring in a bunch of algorithms that drive by AI that allow them to process through a lot of data. And it just says, what are you looking for? And so, for example, if you want to know, well, how much money are we spending on these programs that claim they're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion, it gives you gives you a number and shows you where they are. Look, President Trump has never been more popular. He's more popular right now than most modern presidents. He's the most popular he's ever been. And on virtually every issue that Trump is pushing on, these are what we call 80-20% issues. Like 80% of Americans are actually with him. 80% of Americans don't want the federal government to waste billions of dollars when we have a large and growing and unsustainable debt. So he's on a roll in America.
What about U.S. aid? Forget about what happens back home. But U.S. aid did play a very important role in how you carry out your foreign policy?
No, not really. Actually, that's the problem, right? So, for example, I spent a lot of time with Africans, and and then when I pinged them on, I said, we're going to cut aid to Africa. What do you think? And they go, we don't care. And the reason why they don't care is they don't see any of that money. All that money gets consumed by NGOs and lobbyists and everything else. Hardly any of that money actually trickles down to benefit the lives of Africans. It creates almost no jobs in Africa. It benefits almost no one. And that's not true for every program. Like the AIDS program and some of the other health programs, the Ebola program, usually impactful. And guess what? Those are the programs that are not cut. But the other programs, they're driving political agendas, like diversity. You don't have the right.
These programs are not cut. The Ebola program and.
They cut 83% of the programs, which everybody focuses on the 83% you're cutting. Nobody asks, well, the other, I'm not good. Thank you. Why are you keeping those? And what you'll find in almost every case is the reason why they're keeping those programs is they actually deliver real benefits for people on the ground.
Okay, so very specific question to the neighborhood. Bangladesh, U.S. aid, American interference, real problem for India when it comes to security concerns. What's your reading? Will Sheikh Hasina be reinstated? Or are we looking at elections where Sheikh Hasina might not even be allowed to contest?
Well, I think the aid in Bangladesh is a good example of bad aid. And it's reflective of a lot of the aid that was being cut. It's for political agendas, which actually often didn't even serve U.S. interests. So it wasn't like we were being evil and giving money. We were paying for things, but actually were hurting us because somebody thought it fit into their political agenda. Look, I got to tell you, the U.S. position on Bangladesh is we want a stable and growing South Asia. That is largely in the hands of South Asians. And so, when a lot of Indians say, well, you took your eye off Bangladesh, to me, I was like, dude, that would be like me telling you guys took your eye off Mexico. We had all these cartels in Mexico, and why weren't the Indians saying something? This is your neighborhood. You've got to demonstrate leadership, and if you want strong American partnership, you have to say this is the feasible, suitable, best way forward. That's and America can partner in that, but America can't lead in Bangladesh.
Can't lead in Bangladesh, but can partner in ensuring a strong South Asia. James Carafano, thank you so much for joining us here on the India Today Network.
Thank you.
Thank you.